ask you this: how much did finishing 6-10 grind on you when the season was
Sure.
over? Completely different experience.
Yeah, I think not winning the last game is what grinds on me. I mean, the game, the last one that everybody wants to play in. So 6-10, 10-6, 9-7, 7. It's all the same, right? Everybody wants that last game. So you look at the teams that had great records this past year, quote unquote great records that lost in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Our season ended 6 days later. Their season ended.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Everybody wants to play to the last game. So it's about building. It's about doing it a way that we know that week in, week out, we can be competitive. I think there's situations where, I hear this phrase all the time, the all-in, right? The all-in concept. Well, that's great, but as soon as one of the pieces crack in the all-in, then what do you have? You have to have a foundation underneath it, and that's the most important thing. You got to be able to go out there and win no matter who's playing. And we have a lot of great players. It's not about one guy. It's not about one name. It's about the team. And that's the biggest, thing that we are changing. That's the biggest thing that we're trying to get everybody to understand. There's a lot of guys that played in the last game of the season for us, and we played pretty well up in Green Bay to be able to shut them out. But Andy Jones, not a lot of people talking about him in September. Powell, not a lot of guys talking about him in September. But it doesn't matter if guys go out, play the game. Romeo Okwara wasn't really a big conversation last spring for anybody, in the room. So you just got to keep grinding through to find the guys that can help you win, guys that, just want to do it the right way so that the foundation is laid that you can build upon. And that's what the NFL is. There's always players, we can all name one that no one's ever heard of until the biggest moments in sports, which is that last game. So it's about building those players and developing those players all the way through, and that comes with a foundation of learning and a foundation of doing it the right way. So it may not always look pretty from a number standpoint, but the end, it's all about trying to win the last game, and that's just kind of where our mindset is.
You guys did a pretty good job of filling most of the biggest needs in free agency. Obviously, what do you sort of look at your roster right now and say it's sort of maybe still our biggest need?
Yeah. Good question. Definitely have a couple target points on there that I'm sure if teams in the draft kind of knew exactly what we were thinking there, there's going to be some shifting and motion. Well, it's just, honestly, it's because of where our draft pick is, right? So there is generally conversation, let's say, around those areas where teams are trying to figure out, because again, once you get out of the top 5, then there's the top 10, and as those names come off the board, other teams are always going to be curious, like who's taking this guy. It happened last year with Frank. It's a great example. There was teams all around us that were, looking for guys in those situations, and just kind of being silent helps. A lot of teams probably thought we were going in one direction, and you wind up going in a different direction, and you wind up getting someone that you think you can build off of. So you just got to be careful a little bit with some of that. But I would say in general, from a need standpoint, we're always just going to try to keep finding good players, and there's still good players out there now in free agency. That's the part of it that's great. There's guys that are always signed. Free agency isn't won in the first couple of days. That's really not where it's won. It's won later. It's won after the draft. It's won during training camp, or you find those guys that are out on the street that need jobs and come out and compete, and something just clicks, or they just fit maybe better with you than where they were before, and you can find some really good players from that standpoint.
So since you brought it up, is there like an art to smoke screening?
Yeah, definitely.
There,
I would say it's an interesting chess match at times to try to just, everybody does it, right? Try to figure out what they do. Teams have different philosophies, which is interesting too. If you study the draft, you can really look at teams that take their pick and just sit where they are. There's teams that move. There's teams that try to move. You may be trying to move, you may not be able to move. It always takes another partner to work in that category. So you might be a team that's always actively, every pick going, hey, what can we do here? And it just may not happen. And you may not see it on the forefront, but there's teams that just constantly work the board. And then there's teams that, hey, this is where we pick, and we're going to go with the philosophy of staying where we pick, and we're going to draft the guy that's available, whether it's best available or based on need. That's a whole nother philosophy that goes into it. So very interesting to track teams, and then when teams switch, right, does the philosophies change? Is it head coach driven? Is it GM driven? Is it ownership driven? And kind of how all that works. So those strategies you got to understand, so then when you're having conversations with different people, what conversation you can have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know if this is falling with the smoke screening at all, but you guys have, we talked about this,
Yeah.
you guys have done your homework on the top quarterbacks, right? We all know how you feel
Sure. You know what's amazing about Stafford? Free agency, draft, any of that stuff, if you want information, ask him, because he knows it sometimes better than we do. He is really on top of, he loves the game, which is what's great as a coach, because you're like, what do you think about this guy? And he'll like give you a rundown, and you're like, that was pretty good. He was, pretty right on, and so that's what I really love. That's fun, talking to him about everybody. And again, just as a coach, as a GM, as a quarterback, as a player on our team, we're trying to build the best team we can. So having conversations with guys on our team, that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing to have. In the end, it's all about competition, and that's what it's always going to be about. But I love to have that perspective on all those guys.
You don't have to remind him, like, hey, you're our guy, we're just doing this.
I think he's pretty confident that, he's been in the league a long time. He knows what it looks like. No different than, any player on our team. No different than the O-line. No different than JD. Everybody knows there's competition every single day. Slay knows that. Everybody knows that's what makes a team great. And no one should ever want to be handed anything in this game, because then that breeds complacency. And complacency you can't win with in this league, because everybody in this room is working right now. And probably everybody in this room, coaching-wise, would like to be watching film right now, trying to get an edge on each other. So all of us are trying to get better. The players are the same way, and that's what's great about it.
You talk through and just on the draft question, will you go through and do you like mock draft at all? Like if this team goes up, here's how this changes the board?
Really good question. I call them case studies. You try to do as many case studies as possible. Based on information that we have and what we think teams, again, to go back to Dave's question, so if you guys want to walk around and start asking other teams what are their needs, what are they going to go in the draft, and get that back to me, I'd appreciate that very much. You guys would be able to cover a lot of area for me right there. But we'll always kind of try to assess what we're hearing in the media, what we know from the scouts, what we know from their roster, different needs that they have, so that when we do those mock drafts or case studies, we have a better picture of what it's going to look like. And, to be real honest with you, and Bob can speak to this more, and obviously we can talk about it now, but that's exactly what happened with Frank. We just kept going over and over and over the scenarios, and we just kept looking at the board, and I'm like, every scenario we came up with, I'm like, he's still there. So are we good to go? And it happened exactly like that. So it doesn't always, obviously there's curveballs that come in out of nowhere and things like that change, but that's the fun part, right? You're trying to figure out what everybody else is doing.
There's a really young dynamic. A guy like Devin White out of LSU, you see him maybe at 5, maybe 6, maybe 7, maybe 8.
Sure.
Is he a kind of a player?
Maybe 9, maybe 10. I don't know.
I care about 8.
Yeah.
You can think about 9.
I think about them all.
Second round.
I think about them all.
Okay. Is that a guy like that? Do you look at players like that?
We
see
look.
if they might slide?
Yeah, we look at everybody. You never know what happens in the draft, and who's who's going to be there, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be prepared for all those guys, and then have those conversations of, does it fill a need? Is it best available? Is it someone that can impact us?
LSU.
Yeah, LSU's a great. It's a great school.
How accurate are your case studies? Do you guys have a pretty good sense of like what's going to fall to you, or?
You know what? Accuracy is a tough call because of the multiplicity of different people in this room and that affect the draft. So I was just kind of giving an example last year of obviously that was my first in this chair, so pretty good 1 for 1. We'll just call it that way. But we'll see what it looks like this year. But you just try to go through as many scenarios as possible, just like everything. It's just like game planning. You want to make sure that when those moments come up, and as we know, the clock is moving. It may seem like a long time on television. It's not that long in the room. It's one of those scenarios. So you just want to make sure you're making the best decision possible. So as many of those as you can do, it's great.
Bob was talking earlier this offseason about how difficult it is to project a tight end, in particular, because of how differently they're used in the college game.
No doubt. Yeah, absolutely.
So when you look at the film on a tight end, what traits are most important to you? Like, what are you keying at?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends. Again, the tight end situation, when the tight end changed, right? So, and again, tight end's a great story for the city of Detroit, right? So, history of the game, right? So let's go. So, back in the day, right, 2-back sets, right, fullback, halfback. So mostly, what we call pro formations, or it was two backs in the backfield all the time. Detroit, right? Check me on this. Right, Detroit is one of the first.
Makes you think I know history.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying.
Could you ask
All
somebody
right,
older?
so Detroit was one of the first teams to actually take the fullback out and then put him as the other tight end spot. So, in common language, we call 21. They went to 12, and they were one of the first teams to do that in the league.
Is that Charlie?
Huh?
Is that Charlie Sanders?
God, now you're checking me.
Jim Gibbons, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think it was
Iowa.
Charlie. I don't think it was Charlie.
I think it was Jim Gibbons.
It
back
might have
from
been Jim
Iowa.
Gibbons.
Yeah, back in
All right, now I
60s.
got to look this up. All right, research project for you.
Huh?
So, but anyways, it just the positions change, and so now when you go to the draft, what kind of tight end are you looking for? What can he do? What's his skill set? And that's really, you just want to evaluate his skill set so you can go back and say, okay, what does this guy do really well?
Yeah.
So whether it's a tight end that can catch the ball, get open man-to-man, get open versus linebackers, get open versus safeties, is it a guy that can open up from the formation? Do they move him around a lot? What's his intelligence level? How do they game plan with him? That's one specific guy. Is it a guy that lines up in formation, in line, and comes off the line of scrimmage with good technique, good pad level, and blocks, and does all those things? That's another type of player. So you try to evaluate his skill set the best you can off film, and then, okay, what does he do well, and then try to project from there. But because the college game is very different in a lot of offenses, you don't see some of the traditional stuff that we're looking for, and guys even getting in a three-point stance. One of the things that is such a just assumed, but think about it with college offenses. How many quarterbacks do you see huddle in college? How many quarterbacks do you see up under center? Some of them have never even taken a snap through their entire playing career. So you can't forget about the small things. You can't forget about the little things, because now that kid walks into one of your camps and you're like, all right, you're up under center, and it's like, how do I do this? And you're like, oh my gosh, he's never taken a snap under center. So just trying to evaluate what they can do well and project from there. Yeah. Another good conversation. I would say you would think, but there's I would say college defensively sometimes is pretty routine or the same, or they're not. You don't see a lot of those guys in those situations. Now, there's certain teams that play those styles, so you really dive into those. But then the teams that don't, you got to dig through and try to find those situations. And now you're trying to find those situations against good players. So it becomes even more finite at that point to try to find that particular matchup or that look. So that's the struggle there. So you tend to go back to teams that play a lot of similar style defenses to what we do in the NFL, because you get a better evaluation, and it's probably a truer evaluation of what that guy actually can do at this level. And you just think about press man, off man, quarters versus man to man, middle of the field help. It's just the variables in there, and then to try to narrow that down against a really good player. That's why those matchups or those games, even the bowl games where it's good teams versus good teams, along those lines. You hopefully see more of those situations because there's so many good players on the field. If that makes any sense.
Is that true with pass rushers too in college, or the conversion to the pros? Because they can beat guys with one, a
Sure.
quick step, and it's a little different in the NFL when you can.
Yeah.
A good,
Well, I mean, I think
good
it's.
tackle and just push them out of the
I
way.
would go the other way as opposed to pass rushers. I would go offensive linemen.
Okay.
It's harder to evaluate offensive linemen right now because of the different systems and some of the different schemes. It's hard to see an offensive lineman in a three-point stance. Sometimes you don't even see that. A lot of two-point stance. Sometimes it's shuffled. Sometimes it's sideways. And it's not It's nothing against the college game. The college game's a great game. It's not what I'm saying. It's just some things positionally are different. So when you're trying to evaluate those positions, it becomes really difficult. And I would say to go along with the pass rusher standpoint, specifically the offensive tackle position, it's a hard one to evaluate for all those guys because of that. Centers, there's a lot more stuff in line. You can see some of the quickness inside with guards, but the real space type of movement and the technique and the fundamentals and the punch and the pass set, that's a little bit different at the college level.
Totally different topic. You guys obviously had a couple sets of joint practices last year, but what do you, as you evaluate what you got out of that, and maybe
Yeah.
what you need going forward?
Yeah.
What do you need going forward? How does that change?
Sure.
In terms of what you want this fall, this summer?
Yeah, they're so critically important, and it's kind of a switch that we decided to make. Gosh, I don't even know. Probably it was like 2010, 2011. We started doing those because the way everything was set up in camp, and you would get that 2-week period in, and guys just they get tired of the same old routine. They get tired of hitting each other, and when you can bring in another team that you can work well with and has the same philosophies of how practice should be and the control of it, I think there's a lot you can get done from a fundamental standpoint. There's a lot of really good evaluation work that you can get done. Because, if you practice against the same guy, man-to-man coverage, let's just say, or route running, over and over and over, so you start to learn about that guy, right? You start to know his tendencies, his tips, and you might be sitting there saying, all right, hey, these guys are really improving, or this guy's not improving, but the point is they're learning each other, and that's really what's going on, So now you can get that opportunity versus another team and reevaluate and say, okay, how much did he really improve, or how much did he really learn, or how good of a player is this guy now? And it's another great evaluation tool. Plus, you get to see a new scheme. You get to see different looks, get different situational football that we can go through with other teams that we trust in order to practice, that way and to grow the intelligence part of it. I mean, sometimes you happen to see a couple guys that you say, that guy would work.
Speaking of new schemes, Darrell Bevell said after the season, you're still kind of building this offense.
Yeah.
How fun has that process been for you guys?
Yeah.
Building around the talent that you guys have.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's been great for me to see on the other side of it's obviously very similar philosophy to what I have on defense, and trying to put the players that we have in the best situation possible to win, and that's kind of what he's been able to do with his fundamental background in more of the West Coast philosophy, but really his ability to build on top of that, of having that mind that's creative like that. So it's been great for me to watch him and, Jeff Davidson, who's someone that's been with me for a while, going back to New England, and watch those two work together and kind of build the offense. And, I'd just really be real excited when we get to that point where we can then have the conversation with the players. Because to be honest with you, that's the best part, is when you sit down with the players and we get an opportunity eventually at some point here to sit down with Matt Stafford and say, hey, what do you like? What works for you? These players that we have on our team, they do this really well. How do we fit these pieces together? So it'll be definitely something for us on the offensive side of the ball that'll be a continuing process here through the spring, because the most important key of it will be when we get our players back. So it'll grow, it'll develop, it'll move, it'll shift, and whatever it looks like in the spring will be different than training camp. What it looks like in September is going to be different than what it looks like in December. But having that ability to move and be fluid with that is what's important, for a coach, and Bev's got that, which is great.
Matt, do you think Zach Zenner can be the number 2 running back? I mean, he played well at the end of last year.
Sure. I mean, again, I say it all the time. Zach's great. He's an unbelievable guy, works hard, competes, and he's tough. So whatever he makes his role is what his role is going to be. So I'm excited to see that, and I think he's coming off a year with a lot of confidence. I think it was really great for him to have the end of the year that he did, where it was a situation where sometimes it just takes a little bit of the light bulb to go on, you know what I mean, and a little bit of confidence, and you see players, just step into this whole new role of ability, and he's certainly one of those guys we're excited about for that.
Was carry on a little bit? Go ahead.
We did on TJ Lang earlier, but he's gone, Glover's gone, and then Lawson. How might it be up to you just losing guys that have been in that locker room?
Sure. Always. I mean, obviously, TJ Lang, I love that guy. He's a tough guy. He's a blue-collar guy. He's everything that we're about in Detroit, you know what I mean? I love the city. He loves the city. He loves the team. So a guy I leaned on a lot, as we went through the season, because I think he's got great perspective, and he's been at another organization before he got to Detroit. So just, again, listen, Glover was an unbelievable guy to be around. Nevin, his work ethic was unbelievable. So all great guys, all guys that, worked extremely hard, no different than LeGarrette Blount and guys that, were on the team last year. But you never know what next year is going to look like. It always changes, and what it looks like now will be different. But, for us, it's all about just going forward. The thing about the NFL, and we say this all the time, is they're one-year deals. Everything in the NFL, it's just 1 year. You rebuild every year. Coaches change, players change. That's just the way that it works right now. And to have that mindset to understand, you rebuild it and you recommit to it. It's a 1 year commitment for everybody, and everybody's, diving into that commitment to try to get better. And that's what pushes the thing along. So you just always try to look forward in those instances.
Was Carry on a little bit more of a dual threat than he might have bargained for with his receiving skills? Did that sort of present themselves at a higher level?
Yeah,
than you might have thought?
really good question. Probably, look, at the beginning of the year last year, you guys asked me a lot of questions about Carry On, and to be quite frank, there's a lot of things I just, I didn't want to tip anybody off too, because we did see some of those things, especially in practice, or we did see some of those things on film where maybe he wasn't utilized that way, to go back to the college question, of the same way that we knew we could utilize him. But you definitely could see where he could catch on film. You definitely see some of the things he could do in space. So we just tried to grow him in that process, understanding that we didn't know where he was going to be because he had so much to learn coming from the college to the professional game. So was he going to be able to get that in 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, or 2 years? You don't know as far as until you get him in the building. But something certainly we were able to kind of build upon. And another part of that too was, in the first year for him, I thought he really grew in the blitz pickup, the protection part of it, which is another thing you never really saw in film. But he's a big guy, and he really kind of just hung in there and got better. The thing about it, and it's no different than any player going from year 1 to year 2, it'll be a whole different set of circumstances for him next year. Teams will definitely identify him differently. Teams are going to come at him differently. They're going to put more pressure on him. So is the passing game, is the run game, is the blitz pickup game going to look the same? We don't know, But what I do know is he loves the game. He works extremely hard. This guy wants to win. He cares. So I know he's going to get better. We just got to see how he responds to the different looks that he gets from the other coaches. Sure. I think it's a great question. For us, it's a continual philosophy. I would say that doesn't really change with that position, regardless of carry on. I think it's a position specific thing where those guys, they take a lot of hits. They're in those situations a lot where their bodies are taking some pounding. So you want to be conscious of how many plays they're getting, especially early on in the year. And obviously we just want to win. That's the most important thing. But you do have to look at big picture and say, okay, hey, great, we could win a couple now, but if we wear this guy out and he doesn't help us in the long run, then what's the trade-off? So you always try to evaluate that position specifically to say, how do we balance that? Because there are really only a few guys in the league or that have been in the league that just kind of do that 98% every single down. Those are rare type of guys. So for us, it's a little bit of a different philosophy.
More questions, guys? Sticking with the backfield a little bit. What's the second year look like for a guy like Nick Bowden from both physical and mental perspective since he was really proud of that rookie year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the second year, unfortunately, looks like the first year. So from a standpoint of, I'm just saying, we haven't had the first year yet. The one good thing that he has had, this is another really tough kid now. This is a tough, smart, grinded out, work hard guy. So you love that. This guy's been, through the course of the entire year last year, trying to learn the game, and to be honest with you, has done a great job of it, of just studying what the NFL is about. So very excited to see the mental part of it. The physical part of it, look, those are injuries that are very difficult. So we don't put a timeline on them. We don't, everybody's different. Your ACL is going to respond differently than, Mike's over here. So, you always want to go through that process of, or ankle. So you want to go through that process of letting his body go where it needs to go. But I really enjoyed the mental work that he did through the course of the fall. It was great. No comment.
Wait, are you looking for Mike Rothstein's not here, so I'll ask him. Are you, okay. I had to get the shot in for the group, all right?
There you go.
Are you looking for a veteran backup still? Are you still going to wait till maybe somebody filters down at the right price?
Veteran backup and
Quarterback.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry. Not you, the quarterback.
You know what? We're always going to try to find the best players we think will help us in all the situations. So, if there's a veteran quarterback at whatever point that we think that will be a good addition to our team, we'll bring him in. If there's a young guy, we'll bring him in. You do need to have some layers at all positions because it's a violent game, and you never know what happens. So the biggest thing for us is always being able to develop guys. So we do the best we can there.
Does that mean yes?
Yeah. Sure. I think the biggest thing is when the rules, because the rules change every year, right? There's always additions, always subtractions, whatever it is. The biggest thing for me and for most of the coaches is what exactly is the rule and how do we coach it to the players? So the player, because whatever the rules are, great, we're all playing with the same rules. We just want to know, what's the rule, how's it being officiated, and then we just want to go teach the players the best we can to fit the rule. And there's always situations that come up where, when the rules change, everybody in this room works really hard to kind of push the limits to everything. So there'll be a little bit of gray area that everybody finds to try to get that edge. So that's always the neat part about it. Yeah, we'll see. I bet you there's some pretty interesting philosophies on some scenarios that come up in that situation, if it happens. All right, appreciate everybody. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.